national television show, lecturing at a mainstream silent science conference, or speaking to an alternative science gathering. As he crosses disciplinary and cultural boundaries, he presents to his various audiences a compelling case for negotiating a new consensus on the nature of reality. Michael Cremo is a member of the World Archaeological Congress and the European Association of Archaeologists, as well as an associate member of the Bhaktivedanta Institute, specializing in history and philosophy of science.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us, for being here. And I know that you have a lot to do. And so for you to come on and go through this book and this series of lectures, it's very exciting and we really appreciate it. Thank you very much. You can go give them option to share screen. And I know you'd like to share a PowerPoint.
Yes. Okay, should I start sharing?
Yes, you can go ahead and start sharing.
Spotlight him?
No, not necessary because the PowerPoint will take up the.
True.
Okay. You see the screen?
Yes, we see the screen.
Okay, I have to make it full. Let's see.
If you go up to the top for slideshow also, uh, a little bit to the left, almost right in the center, slideshow, and then it'll give you the option to start slideshow from the beginning. And then on the first one on the left,
First one on the left.
the upper left, yeah, it says from beginning. Yeah, keep going a little bit more, and then down. Yeah, there you
go. Oh, something happened. Do you see the presentation?
Yes, we can see the presentation, but if you just start it from, click that button on the upper left that says from beginning, then the presentation, the slide will take up the entire screen.
Okay, I'm not seeing that.
Let's see, where's your cursor?
Oh, here, view. My cursor is at the top left.
Yeah, there's just the first button that says it has a little rectangle with an arrow, and then it says from beginning.
Yeah.
Alternatively, we can also share the slideshow from our end, and then you can just give us directions for moving on to the next slide.
Okay, I'm sorry, we may have to do that.
It's right below the file menu. File.
Yeah, right under the word file.
Top
Under the
left.
word. Yeah, I'm not seeing that.
Okay, well, we can share here, no problem.
Okay. And how do I see what you're sharing?
You'll be able to see it on your screen. I think I downloaded it already.
Oh, you're right.
Yes, and yes.
Oh, okay. I see what you're sharing.
Okay. Okay, there you go.
Okay, thank you. Uh, thank everyone for coming to hear something about my book, Human Devolution, a Vedic Alternative to Darwin's Theory. In these talks, I'm going to be discussing the text, its impact, and its current relevance. This is the book Forbidden Archaeology, and many of you have seen it, or at least you've heard about it. Next slide. I'm not seeing it change. Oh, there it is. Okay. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about the introduction to the book and its first chapter. And in succeeding issues, succeeding versions of this book club meeting, I'm going to be talking about the different chapters of the book. So in the introduction, I wanted to do three things. Discuss how and why I wrote the book Human Devolution, explain basically what's in the book, and that was for basically for reporters and others who might receive a review copy of the book and want to speak to me about it, but didn't have time to read. They wouldn't have time to read the full book, which is about 500 pages long. And I also wanted to establish why I felt myself qualified to say something about this topic in a book that was having its audiences the academic and scientific world. Next. To understand how the book Human Devolution came about, it's necessary to understand something about my working relationship with Dr. Richard L. Thompson, Sadaputa Prabhu. In 1984, I was asked by the trustees of the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust to work with Sadaputa Prabhu, Dr. Thompson, on a publication basically meant for distribution to college students. That publication was called Origins. And in it, we laid out the basic position, our basic Vedic perspective on the important questions. What is the origin of the universe? What is the origin of life? What is the origin of species? And what is the origin of consciousness? And the way I approached my collaboration with Sadaputa Prabhu was basically, since I did not have a science background, I sat with him for many, many days, asking him different questions about these different topics. And it was like a crash course in science and religion. And the the publication came out. And next slide. We decided to turn each part of the magazine into a book. And we were deciding who would work on which part. And I was given this part of the magazine about human evolution to work on in a book-length form. So that research and writing took about 6 years. Next slide. I mean, the Vedic conception is that humans have existed for vast periods of time, far longer than modern science allows. And during the research that we did, we found that there are numerous reports of evidence that is consistent with the Vedic view of human origins and antiquity. And that book came out in 1993, Forbidden Archaeology. It's 900 pages, and we brought out an abridged version called The Hidden History of the Human Race. Next slide. So when this book came out, I mailed copies of it to the book review editors of all the major academic and scientific journals on archaeology, anthropology, history of science, and philosophy of science. Next slide. Of course, the essential message contradicted the current dominant ideas about human evolution. Next slide. And it did have some impact. In addition to sending it to all of these scientific and academic journals, eventually about a dozen major reviews were published. I also sent it to individual scholars and scientists that we mentioned in the book. One of them was Dr. William W. Howells of Harvard University. He was one of the architects of the current Darwinian understanding, evolutionary understanding of human origins. And he wrote to me, "Thank you for sending me a copy of Forbidden Archaeology, which represents much careful effort in critically assembling published materials. Most of us, mistakenly or not, see human evolution with man emerging rather late. To have modern human beings appearing a great deal earlier, in fact, at a time when even simple primates did not exist as possible ancestors, would be devastating to the whole theory of evolution." Next slide. Ken Feder, an anthropologist, wrote a lengthy review of Forbidden Archaeology for Geoarchaeology, a scientific journal. He wrote, "When you attempt to deconstruct a well-accepted paradigm, it is reasonable to expect that a new paradigm be suggested in its place." Next slide. He continued, "The authors are open about their membership in the Bhaktivedanta Institute, which is a branch of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. They make a reasonable request regarding their affiliation with this organization." Quote, he's quoting us, "That our theoretical outlook is derived from the Vedic literature should not disqualify it," end quote. And then he asked, "Fair enough, what is their theoretical outlook?" Next slide. My answer to that question was the book Human Devolution, a Vedic alternative to Darwin's theory. Next. Actually, Sadaputa and I had originally conceived the book that was published as Forbidden Archaeology as a combination of the evidence that contradicted the current theories and combined with it an outline presentation of an alternative. But next slide. As we wrote in the introduction to Forbidden Archaeology, our research program led to results we did not anticipate, and hence a book much larger than originally envisioned. In other words, when we began the research into anomalous evidence related to human origins, we did not necessarily expect to find as much as we did. In other words, a little research turned into a lot of research when one case simply led to another. So continuing from the introduction, because of this, we have not been able to develop in this volume our ideas of an alternative to current theories of human origins. We are therefore planning a second volume relating our extensive research results in this area. Next. So that's how the book came to be written. It was originally conceived of as part of the first book. And I think somewhere around in the archives, there's a video that Sadaputa Peru and I produced outlining what the whole book would have been about. But I haven't been able to locate it myself. So in the introduction to human devolution, I wanted to establish some slight degree of credibility for writing on this topic. And one thing I did in the book was include many of the reviews of forbidden archaeology that were published in prominent academic journals. And then I also mentioned papers that I had presented at major international conferences on archaeology and anthropology and history of science, and also list some of the publications that were published in academic proceedings that later became chapters in the book Human Devolution. And I also listed some of the scientific institutions and universities that I had been invited to speak at. Next. So I also didn't want to exaggerate the importance of that. I wrote in the introduction to Human Devolution, in terms of ordinary scholarship, this modest collection of conference presentations, public and university lectures is not overly impressive. And the anti-evolutionary content, they are, I believe, historically significant. They show that scientists and historians of science, whether or not they agree with the conclusions expressed in the presentations, now consider such presentations part of the active discourse in their disciplines. And we have to keep this in historical context within Bhaktivedanta Institute and the Krishna consciousness movement in general. Up to the time that Forbidden Archaeology and Human Devolution were published, there had been no real presence of this point of view expressed in academic and scientific publications. So I think it was historically significant in that sense. Next slide. So dealing with the reviews of forbidden archaeology, one reason I wanted to present them was to lay the foundation for presenting a Vedic alternative going beyond the concept of human antiquity to more spiritual Vedic concepts of human origins. In other words, forbidden archaeology simply presents evidence for extreme human antiquity, that humans have existed for vast periods of time on Earth. And I want to deal with the academic responses that included requests for an alternative theory, which were going to contain materials about consciousness and spiritual matters that were beyond the archaeological evidence presented in forbidden archaeology. And I thought it was significant in that many of these reviews, they were actively requesting information about a Vedic alternative. Next. So one of the most extensive reviews of forbidden archaeology came from some historians of science, David Oldroyd and his graduate student, Joe Wodak, who wrote a 23-page long review article about forbidden archaeology in the journal Social Studies of Science. And I thought it was significant that they gave a lot of attention to the Vedic background of the authors. They gave, this is a quote from the introduction to Human Devolution. Wodak and Oldroyd gave extensive background information on the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, which the authors of Forbidden Archaeology are members. They characterized it as a modern variant of the Bhakti sects that have dominated religious life over the last 1.5 millennia. The teachings of the movement's founder, Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, for Prabhupada, science gives no adequate account of the origin of the universe or of life, end quote. The Bhaktivedanta Institute, they comment on, quote, the boldness of its intellectual program, and Vedic chronology, quote, partial dissolutions called pralaya supposedly take place every 4.32 billion years, bringing catastrophes in which whole groups of living forms can disappear. They also made many references to the Rig Veda, Vedanta, the Puranas, the Atma, Yoga, and Karma. So I thought it was significant that as a result of our work in forbidden archaeology, that things like this were entering into the discourse of these disciplines of science studies, archaeology, and anthropology. Next. Now, as I was writing Human Devolution, I was simultaneously presenting papers on topics that were later integrated into the book. For example, at a conference, a major conference on consciousness studies toward a science of consciousness, I presented a paper called The City of Nine Gates, a sophisticated allegory for mind-body dualism from the Bhagavad Purana of India. Material from that paper can be found in chapter 7 of Human Devolution. Another such paper that I presented was Alfred Russel Wallace and the Supernatural. I presented that at the 7th Interdisciplinary Conference on Science and Culture. Material from that paper is incorporated into chapter 5 of Human Devolution. In other words, it's a similar sort of situation to people who, while writing a doctoral thesis, for example, will present papers related to it in the course of their writing. So as I said, simultaneously with writing the book, I was testing the material in academic and scientific conferences. Next slide. Basically, Human Devolution is a Bhagavad Gita class for intellectuals. Basically, Bhagavad Gita, chapter 15, text 7. The living entities in this conditioned world are my eternal fragmental parts. Due to conditioned life, they are struggling very hard with the 6 senses, which include the mind. Basically, the message of the book is we don't evolve up from matter as conscious individual personal beings. Rather, we descend from the level of pure consciousness or spirit to the material world where consciousness is covered by the material senses and mind. Next slide. So I'm going to move on to chapter 1. And the chapter is called Ascended Apes or Fallen Angels. Now, according to the mainstream views, as conscious individual personal beings, we evolve up from matter. In other words, matter produces consciousness. And our view is no, matter doesn't produce consciousness. Consciousness is a symptom of the soul, which belongs in an environment suited for its eternal existence. At the present moment, however, some of the souls, some of the conscious selves are in the world of matter, where they function in vehicles made of matter to satisfy their material desires, or if they take advantage of the opportunity, restore consciousness to its original pure state. So, how to express that to a basically Western or audience that's been influenced heavily by Western modern scientific ideas. I thought for that sort of environment, let me put it in terms of uh, the historical context of these ideas in the Western world. And basically, that takes us to the time of Darwin. And in 19th century England, the question was discussed in terms of ascended apes or fallen angels, particularly in a significant debate that took place in England between Thomas Huxley and the Bishop Wilberforce of the Church of England. Uh, Basically, today, we could say that the idea that we're ascended apes has won the day, and any alternative is dismissed a priori. But there are some academics and scholars who object to that. For example, anthropologist Catherine Ewing wrote, "To rule out the possibility of belief in another's reality is to impose the hegemony of one's own view of the world." Next. And it's kind of interesting that uh, although the apes kind of won out in the beginning, the angels still had some supporters. For example, Benjamin Disraeli was a supporter of the idea that we're fallen angels. And in the course of the book, of course, I translate these concepts into uh, Western terminology related to consciousness and matter. But as initial ideas, the idea of apes and angels is the context in which I introduce these the Vedic alternative. Now, Disraeli was heavily mocked by English academics for saying he was on the side of the angels. Next. And I used material from a book that he wrote, a novel called Tancred, in which he expressed his ideas about these things. Tancred, his main character in this novel, was an English aristocrat who was disappointed with the materialist ideology that was becoming dominant in mid 19th century England. He he uh, he had a lady friend who was very much an advocate of these new ideas, but he didn't find them very satisfying. Next slide, please. So he would get into big discussions with her about these things, and she would present the latest scientific ideas that she had read about, but he maintained his doubts. So he decided to go to the East, to the Mideast, not as far as India, but he went to Israel next. And he encountered an angel there. And from his contact with this superhuman angelic being, he uses that as the basis for proposing that the modern West needs an infusion of spiritual knowledge from the East to kind of replace the heavily materialistic culture that was being promoted in Europe at the time. So by using this as a foundation for chapter 1 of human devolution, my idea, yes, it's a fictional angel, I see, according to one of the comments. But but I wanted to use this as something from within the culture of the West that has some connection with introducing uh, things that go beyond the current materialistic paradigm, physicalist paradigm. Next. And then I talked a little bit about modern angel contact testimony from different people. And in the first chapter of Human Devolution, I wrote, so is this to be considered just mythological or uh, fictional, as has been said? Or is there perhaps some reality lying behind this idea that there's something more than consciousness being produced by combinations of matter within the brain? And um, just suggests that we should look at that question. And it's not that it's coming from outside the West entirely. Even within the Western academic, intellectual sphere, there are suggestions and hopes and desires related to this question. So, next slide. And again, I'll return to the quote, Catherine P. Ewing. Quote, to rule out the possibility of belief in another's reality is to encapsulate that reality and thus to impose implicitly the hegemony of one's own view of the world. This comes from a paper that she wrote called Dreams from a Saint, Anthropological Atheism and the Temptation to Believe. So in that article, she deals with personal experiences that she had as an anthropologist, going to Pakistan to study Sufi mystics. And she, as part of her field work, she had interviewed a Sufi mystic who had told her, "You don't really believe in these things, do you? Well, I'm going to appear to you in such a way that you're not going to be under the influence of your disbelief." And she recounted how she, the same mystic had appeared to her in a dream in a way that just totally blew her away. And she was dealing with the question that comes up in anthropology about how an anthropologist should deal with testimony from people gathered during anthropological research. Should you maintain what she calls anthropological atheism, or do you actually venture into the realm of belief, based, justified belief based on your experiences? It's, I think, a very important question. Next slide. So just to preview what's coming up, the next meeting, I'm going to be dealing with chapters 2, 3, and 4 of Human Devolution. And these chapters show that there's actually some reason to propose alternatives based on shortcomings within the evidence brought forward to support the current paradigm. In chapter 2 of Human Devolution, I summarize the archaeological evidence for extreme human antiquity, which contradicts the current theories of evolution. In chapter 3, I deal with evidence for the extreme antiquity of non-human species, because forbidden archaeology is basically about human evidence. And then in chapter 4, I deal with genetic evidence, at least up to the years that the book was written in. So, in other words, why present an alternative unless there's some reason to present it? So that's what I'll be dealing with next time. Next slide. I chose to introduce an alternative, again, coming from within the Western world, by introducing the work of Alfred Russel Wallace, who was, along with Darwin, the co-founder of the theory of evolution by natural selection. Chapter 5 is titled Beyond Stones and Bones, Alfred R. Wallace and the Spirit World. He proposed that consciousness was something different than matter, that humans on Earth were part of a whole cosmic hierarchy of beings, and that such beings, including human beings, had powers beyond those allowed by the modern laws of physics. So that's in the next book club meeting after chapters 2, 3, and 4. I'm going to be going over 5 and 6. Next slide. I mean, basically, what I'm proposing is, before we ask where do human beings come from, we should first ask what is a human being. And the setup for that is the work of Alfred Russel Wallace as someone from the West who had reached a conclusion that a human being is something more than just the ordinary chemical elements. And so in chapter 6, I'll be dealing with what's indicated in the title of that chapter. What is a human being? Matter, mind, and consciousness. So chapters 5 and 6 will be discussed together next. And that leads to the question, well, you're proposing that human beings are not purely material and that they're part of a whole cosmic hierarchy of beings. What is that all about? So in chapters 7 and 8, we'll be dealing with that question. Chapter 7 is the cosmic hierarchy, a cross-cultural study. In that chapter, I examine the cosmologies of 40 different cultures widely separated in time and space, including the Vedic culture, and show that they propose exactly that we exist in a multi-dimensional cosmos with levels of gross matter, subtle matter, and pure spirit, and that there are beings adapted to the conditions at the different levels. And then the question arises, well, what's the evidence for that? And in chapter 8, Apparitions, Aliens, and Angels, I look at the scientific evidence that is consistent with this. And that takes us into the area of paranormal research, among others. Next. So in that chapter, I deal with various categories of evidence reported in the Western scientific and academic literature related to communications from departed humans, possession of human bodies on this level of reality by departed human spirits, apparitions of departed human beings, possession by superhuman beings, and apparitions of superhuman beings, plus the modern UFO alien abduction events. Next slide. So in the chapters 9 and 10 will be the subject of a talk on these book club meetings. Chapter 9 deals with paranormal modification and production of biological form. This was something that was introduced into Western scientific discourse by Alfred Russel Wallace, and it's one of the main reasons why he's no longer very much mentioned in connection with the theory of evolution. It used to be called the Wallace-Darwin theory. Now it's called Darwin's theory. But it was because of his research into this topic that Darwin broke off his relationship with Wallace. And there, in addition to the kind of evidence brought forward by Wallace, there is modern research that's also consistent with this idea that mind can influence biological form. And in chapter 10, A Universe Designed for Life, we'll look at the concept that this universe appears to be designed for the existence of biological life forms, takes us into in what cosmology is called the fine-tuning question. And then finally, the last lecture will be on chapter 11, Human Devolution, a Vedic Account, in which I summarize everything, bring it together in a consistent account of human origins from the Vedic point of view. I call it a Vedic account because there may be many Vedic accounts, and this is my proposal. Next. So we may be wondering, well, what is the academic response to stuff like this? And as we go through each chapter, I'm going to give examples of responses by scholars and scientists. But just to, as an introduction, I'll give this from Jeffrey H. Schwartz, published in History and Philosophy of the Life Sciences. Quote, as a Vedic, non-Western, that's his interjection there, as a Vedic, non-Western alternative to Darwinism, it is also an alternative to the literature that is from scientific creationists. That contrast is interesting and might be of interest to readers of this journal. And that is actually what I intended by bringing out this book, that it would be seen as something new, something different from biblical creationism, which is what most academics and scientists are familiar with in terms of alternatives to Darwinism. As Schwartz said, I anticipated that contrast would be interesting to people who are studying the history and philosophy of biology and the other life sciences. So that is a kind of a preview of some of the academic responses to human devolution. Next slide. So these are some of my books about these topics. Next slide. Of course, human devolution, but some of you may find interesting this book, My Science, My Religion, which is a collection of 24 papers that I presented on these topics at mainstream academic and scientific conferences. Next slide. So that's some contact information. Next slide. And as far as the books go on my website, we have a special limited time offer for 5 of my books for a special low price. The Hidden History of the Human Race, which is the abridged version of Forbidden Archaeology, Forbidden Archaeology's Impact, which documents responses from scientists, academics, and others, and my replies, Human Devolution, of course, The Forbidden Archaeologist, and My Science, My Religion. Next slide. I just want to give some indication of the response when I started. When the book was published, I went out to represent it in different places. One of them was India. I went on a tour of India, going to Calcutta, Mumbai, Bangalore, Coimbatore, Trivandrum, Chennai, and Hyderabad. Next. The book was launched in Calcutta in a meeting chaired by Ambarish Prabhu. Next. I gave interviews to all of the major newspapers in India. Next. Next. And quite a number of articles were published in these papers: Origin of Species versus Vedic Devolution. Next. Evolution versus Devolution. Next. Vedas versus Darwin. Next. Human beings devolved from a supreme conscious self. Next. Michael's theory of evolution. Next. I also appeared on Indian national television. Next. And several other television networks. Next. 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 Had author events at bookstores in all the major cities. Next. 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 And also spoke at many academic and scientific institutions. It's a graduate seminar on human devolution given at the anthropology department of Calcutta University. Next. Indian Institute of Technology in Mumbai. Next. Center for Cellular and Molecular Biology in Hyderabad. Next. Defense Research and Development Organization, lecture to there. Next. Indian Institute of Technology, Chennai. Next. Next. Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore. Next. And reviews such as this: for the first time in history of modern science, the authority of Darwinism theory has been challenged with a viable Vedic alternative. Next. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. I'm presenting it as my attempt at the time when there weren't very many devotee academics and scientists dealing in public with this issue. And I regarded it at the time as an experiment, the initial trying out of an idea to see what possible impact it could have and where efforts might be made in the future. So I want to get back to a screen where I can see all of you. Let's see.
Can you see us?
Okay, I can't see everyone. Go to view.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, now I can see everyone. Are there any questions or comments?
Thank you very much, Director Carmo. I have a question for you. Um, I think one of the, I don't remember exactly who it was, but someone was describing what you had written and they referred to Vedic as non-Western. Is there a different definition or an additional definition to the word Vedic? What is it referring to in this context where it's a Vedic alternative to Darwin's theory?
Is there an alternative?
Yeah, so when it says a Vedic alternative, is it referring to a specific period of time? I'm assuming that it's a little bit more than just saying non-Western for the word Vedic, or maybe that is just what it means.
Uh, in the introduction to the book, I explain what I mean by Vedic, or in the introduction and elsewhere. Uh, by Vedic, I mean that the Vedic tradition, well, first of all, what are the Vedas? I point out that I represent a specific school of thought that includes the Puranas in the Vedas. So, uh, that is a specific point that's specific to me, and I believe others within the Bhaktivedanta Institute, that our definition of Vedic means the four Vedas, the Upanishads, the Brahmanas, and the Puranas and the Itihasas, the Vedic cosmological and historical texts, and some others as well, but principally the Puranas. And even among the Puranas, we especially favor the Bhagavat Purana. And beyond that, there are and have always been 6 schools of Vedic thought, the Saddarshanas, which range from the materialistic atheism of Gautama and Kanada to the devotional bhakti point of view. So, and then there's Patanjali, the yoga system. There are 6 darshans, but we're from the Vaishnava darshan, or I am approaching things from the Vaishnava point of view. And even among the Vaishnavas, there are different sampradayas. So when I explain these things, I say I represent the Gaudiya Vaishnava school of Vaishnavism. And even within that, there are some differences. So if I'm being really specific, I'll say the Gaudiya Vaishnava teachings as I've received them through the line coming through my guru, spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada. And even there, I mean, if I'm going to be really honest, and I try to be, there's a distinction to be made as I understand them. So that's why I say not the Vedic alternative to Darwin's theory, I say a Vedic with all of those qualifications of what I mean by Vedic, what are the Vedas, which line of Vedic thought I'm talking about, what branch of that line I'm talking about, and what my perspective is as an individual. And I would say I realize that I'm taking a particular approach. I'm not insisting it's the only way that these questions could be approached, either in the larger circle of religious studies or Vaishnav studies or ISKCON studies. It's my attempt to present, I mean, non-Western is a term that comes up in academic circles, like in the Journal of the World Archaeological Congress, of which I'm a member. It's one of the largest organizations of professional archaeologists. Their journal is called Archaeologies. And in the editorial guidelines, it says, we welcome, perspectives, non-Western perspectives. So it's a term that sometimes I use because it's used within the circles that I deal with. But I mean, essentially, it's not Western or non-Western thought that I'm representing. I'm representing Vedic thought, which is neither East or West. It's universal.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I thought that him referring to Vedic as just non-Western was very simplistic and didn't explain anything at all. So thank you for explaining that. There is a question. Let's see, there was a question about one of the did Alfred R. Wallace disbelieve in evolution? His name was Russell.
No, he didn't disbelieve in evolution. It's an interesting story, Wallace. He where he differed is what it is that's evolving. In other words, Darwin was pretty strictly a physicalist, and he didn't accept the idea that there were elements of living things that were not strictly physicalist in the sense of being combinations of the ordinary material elements, the ones in the periodic table. And he also didn't have room for any kind of what might be called paranormal powers. But Wallace, by his different personal investigations into these topics, came to the conclusion that connected with the human being, there were different powers, paranormal powers like psychokinesis, mind over matter, that there was something that appeared to survive the death of the body, that we were part of a whole cosmic hierarchy of beings. In other words, when somebody leaves their body, they go somewhere and they continue to exist. And they may even communicate with humans still living on Earth. And they describe being part of a different realm. So those were the kinds of things that he got involved with, not just himself, but different colleagues within the scientific world. And those things really couldn't be accommodated by Darwin within his strictly physicalist approach to the question. So, as far as evolution by natural selection goes, uh, Wallace did believe that, but and as a matter of fact, he apparently came up with the idea before Darwin did, or at least at the same time Darwin did, because Darwin had gone on the voyage of the Beagle and gotten some inclination, some inkling of his eventual theory. And he went back to England and he spent several decades writing the manuscript for The Origin of Species, but he got in the mail a letter from Wallace, a younger English naturalist, who had said, I've got this wonderful idea, evolution by natural selection, and I'm going to have it presented as a paper at the Linnaean Society in London very soon. And Darwin was shocked, because that was the theory that he'd come up with, and now somebody else was going to publish it first. So he was a supporter of evolution by natural selection, but especially in terms of human beings, he had a different idea about what a human being is and how it came into existence, the human form, and what its goal and purpose was. Brahmatirtha Prabhu, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I'm here. Okay. Yep. Hey, Judah Karma, this was one of our best book club talks because you presented what was said in the book, where it stands in relation to science, ideas for further research. I loved it. Thank you. And I'd appreciate if you could send me the PowerPoint. Now to my specific question. We're going to do a conference in about a year from now. I'll get you involved when we start figuring out more on evolution. We need a workshop on it at the BI. So we're just beginning the brainstorming. And I had one incident with Sadhaputta, Richard Thompson, that I want to share and get your comment on. We were going through a walk in Mayapur, and we came across a Vaishnav temple. And in it, they had bas-relief carvings in front of the temple. And one of them looked exactly like a brontosaurus. So we went and found the priest and said, what is that? Now, he spoke Bengali and my Hindi was pretty weak. Well, we were able to communicate. And he said, this comes from the Puranas. So, which we found quite curious, but there was no way for us to follow up with him. I am curious about the issues of dinosaurs. Over.
Well, in the Bhagavad Purana, there's the story of King Nriga. And in that story, it takes place in the region around Dwarka. Krishna had gone out with some of his sons on a picnic, I guess. They were riding around and they came to a big cavern in the ground. And the sons of Krishna saw there was some creature in the bottom of this cavity in the ground. and they pulled it out. Actually, they needed Krishna's help to pull it out because it was so big. And Srila Prabhupada translates it as a big lizard. But if you look in the original Sanskrit, it says that it was a lizard as big as a mountain. So what does that sound like? A gigantic lizard.
A dinosaur.
Sounds like a dinosaur. I mean, a dinosaur is a big, dangerous reptile. And, even today, we share our planet with big, dangerous reptiles. So, um, like alligators, you have them in Gainesville.
And crocodiles in Miami.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I can't give you a species breakdown of the dinosaurs like Brontosaurus, Tyrannosaurus, all the different species of dinosaurs. But I think it would be an interesting project for someone who knows Sanskrit to make a compendium of all the different types of living entities that are mentioned in the Vedic literature. Be a huge project, but
Worth doing.
worth doing, so that we have a complete picture. I mean, we have the basic idea that there are 8,400,000 different kinds of bodies, not all of them present at the same moment. But the way I look at it is they eternally exist in the sense of being in the mind of God, so that whenever there's a conditioned soul, a conscious living entity that requires such a bodily vehicle, it will be there. It will be available for that soul to experience material reality in an interactive way through. Anything else?
Many things, but not now. We'll wait till another class.
Hey,
We'll get into the book further and I'll ask more, and so will others.
hey, thank you very much. This has been enlightening. I'm looking forward into getting deeply into the book. Very much appreciate your time. Thank you all for being here. Again, message me if you would like to purchase a book, and also there's the information that was given about buying the entire set. And I personally purchased, in addition to this hardcover, I have a Kindle edition, which is really nice for portability. So thank you very much. Have a wonderful weekend, everyone, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks. If there are any questions, please feel free to, anything comes up, any discussion points or question, if it comes up during the week or the next 2 weeks, you can post them into the WhatsApp group. I posted the link on that. And also Prishni, one of the articles that was mentioned, she posted a link to it in the chat.
Well, thank you again for hosting me at this book club event. It's a great honor for me. And I do apologize. Recently, I got a new computer and operating system, so no learning way around it. So sorry for the technical difficulty in the beginning. Okay, thanks again.
problem at all. Thank you. See you next time. Hare Krishna.